Hello, team. Welcome back to another week of remote learning and this week's library lesson. I just want to say at this point how proud I am of all of your incredible hard work. So do keep it up, please. Now, today is the day that we finally get to read the section of To Kill a Mockingbird that I have talked about and hyped up for probably like months now. So I'm really excited. I hope you're excited. I hope you enjoy it. There are going to be some red sections for you to read throughout the library lesson, but I'm going to read the majority of Atticus's speech, which is the part that I'm obsessed with. Obviously, you need to complete your quiz after this lesson, but it would also be great for any of you to share your opinions of the speech from Atticus. It would be great to have a kind of conversation with some of you about it, like we would if we were in the classroom. So please do email me if you have any opinions or you want to just chat about it, because it's amazing. I will literally love to talk about it with you. So without further ado, let's get into it. Just a reminder, at this stage we have seen Tom Robinson get questioned by Atticus, and now Mr. Gilmer, who's representing the Ewell family, is questioning Tom Robinson. So let's get into it. No, sir. She said she had something for me to do inside the house. She says she asked you to bust up a shift robe. Is that right? No, sir, it ain't. Then you say she's lying, boy. Atticus was on his feet, but Tom Robinson didn't need him. I don't say she's lying, Mr. Gilmer. I say she's mistaken in her mind. To the next 10 questions, as Mr. Gilmer reviewed Mayella's version of events, the witness's steady answer was that she was mistaken in her mind. Didn't Mr. Ewell run you off the place, boy? No, sir, I don't think he did. Don't think? What do you mean? I mean, I didn't stay long enough for him to run me off. You're very candid about this. Why did you run so fast? I said I was scared, sir. If you had a clear conscience, why were you scared? Like it says before, it weren't safe for any to be in a fix like that. But you weren't in a fix. You testified that you were resisting Miss Ewell. Were you so scared that she'd hurt you, you ran, a big buck like you? No, sir. I scared I'd be in court, just like I am now. Scared of arrest? Scared you'd have to face up to what you did? No, sir. Scared I'd have to face up to what I didn't do. Are you being impudent to me, boy? No, sir. I didn't go to be. Just before you read this red section here, I think it's really important to pull out this quote here. No, sir. Scared I'd have to face up to what I didn't do. It's a representation of how black and also ethnic minorities in South America at this time felt like the court system was going to fail them, whether they did or didn't do it anyway, which is, very kind of saddening. So pause the video now and read this red bit. If you can, try and read it aloud to practice speaking aloud. If you can't, just read it in your head. Okay, so let's carry on. Come on out under the trees, I said. Heat got you, I expect. We chose the fattest live oak and we sat under it. It was just him I couldn't stand, Dill said. Who? Tom? That old Mr. Gilmer doing him that way, talking so hateful to him. Dill, that's his job. Why, if we didn't have prosecutors, well, we couldn't have defence attorneys, I reckon. Dill exhaled patiently. I know all that, Scout. It was the way he said it made me sick. Plain sick. He's supposed to act that way, Dill. He was cross. He didn't act that way when... Dill, those were his own witnesses. Well, Mr. Finch didn't act that way to Mayella and old man Ewell when he cross-examined them. The way that man called him boy all the time and sneered at him and looked around at the jury every time he answered. Well, Dill, after all, he's just a... I don't care one speck. It ain't right. Somehow it ain't right to do him that way. Hasn't anybody got any business talking like that? It just makes me sick. That's just Mr. Gilmer's way, Dill. He does them all that way. You never seen him get gunned down on one yet. Why, when... Well, today, Mr. Gilmer seemed to be like he wasn't half trying. They do him all that way. Mostly lawyers, I mean. Mr. Finch doesn't. He's not an example, Dill. I was trying to grope in my memory for a sharp phrase of Miss Maudie Atkinson's. I had it. He's the same in the courtroom as he is on the public streets. That's not what I mean, said Dill. I know what you mean, boy, said a voice behind us. We thought it came from the tree trunk, but it belonged to Mr. Dolphus Raymond. He peered around the trunk at us. You aren't thin-hided. It just makes you sick, doesn't it? Come on round here, son. I got something that will settle your stomach. As Mr. Dolphus Raymond was an evil man, I accepted his invitation reluctantly, but I followed Dill. Somehow I didn't think Atticus would like it if we became friendly with Mr. Raymond, and I knew Aunt Alexandra wouldn't. Here, he said, offering Dill his paper sack with straws in it. Take a good sip. It will quieten you. Dill sucked on the straws, smiled, and pulled at length. Hee hee, said Mr. Raymond, evidently taking delight in corrupting a child. Dill, you watch out now, I warned. Dill released the straws and grinned. Scout, it's nothing but Coca-Cola. Mr. Raymond sat up against a tree trunk. He had been lying on the grass. You little folks won't tell on me now, will you? It'd ruin my reputation if you did. You mean, were you drinking that sack's Coca-Cola? Just plain Coca-Cola. Okay, pause and read this section now, please. Okay, welcome back. Let's carry on. I try to give them a reason, you see. It helps folks if they latch on to a reason. When I come to town, which is seldom, remember seldom means like rarely, if I weave a little and drink out of his sack, folks can say Dolphus Raymond's in the clutches of whiskey. That's why he won't change his ways. He can't help himself. That's why he lives the way he does. That ain't honest, Mr. Raymond, making yourself out badder than you already are. It ain't honest, but it's mighty helpful to folks. Secretly, Miss Finch, I'm not much of a drinker. But you see, they could never understand that I live like I do because that's the way I want to live. I had a feeling that I shouldn't be here listening to this sinful man who had mixed children and didn't care who knew it, but he was fascinating. I'd never encountered a being who deliberately perpetrated fraud against himself. Why had he entrusted us with his deepest secret? I asked him why. Because you're children, and you can understand it, he said. Because I had that one. He jerked his head at Dill. Things haven't caught up with that one's instinct yet. Let him get a little older, and he won't get sick and cry. Maybe things will strike him as being not quite right, say, but he won't cry, not when he gets a few years on him. Cry about what, Mr. Raymond? Dill's maleness was beginning to assert itself. Cry about the simple hell people give other people, without even thinking. Cry about the hell white people give coloured folks without even stopping to think that they're people too. Atticus says cheating a coloured man is 10 times worse than cheating a white man, I muttered. Says it's the worst thing you can do. Mr. Raymond said, I don't reckon it's... Miss Jean Louise, you don't know your pa's not a run-off-the-mill man. It'll take a few years for that to sink in. You haven't seen enough of the world yet. You haven't even seen this town. But all you've got to do is step back inside the courthouse. Which reminded me that we were missing nearly all of Mr. Gilmer's cross-examination. I looked at the sun, and it was dropping fast behind the store tops on the west side of the square. Between two fires, I could not decide which I wanted to jump into, Mr. Raymond or the 5th Judicial Circuit Court. Come on, Dill, I said. You all right now? Yeah. Glad to have met you, Mr. Raymond, and thanks for the drink. It was mighty settling. Okay, pause and read this section now, please. Okay, let's carry on. I punched Jem. How long's he been at it? He's just gone over the evidence, Jem whispered. We're going to win, Scout. I don't see how we can't. He's been at it about 5 minutes. He made it as plain and easy as, well, as I'd explained it to you. You could have understood it, even. Did Mr. Gilmer? Shh, nothing new. Just the usual. Hush now. We looked down again. Atticus was speaking easily, with the kind of detachment he used when he dictated a letter. He walked slowly up and down in front of the jury, and the jury seemed to be attentive. Their heads were up, and they followed Atticus's route with what seemed to be appreciation. I guess it was because Atticus wasn't a thunderer. Atticus paused, then he did something he didn't ordinarily do. He unhitched his watch and chain and placed them on the table, saying, with the court's permission? Judge Taylor nodded, And then Atticus did something I never saw him do before or since, in public or in private. He unbuttoned his vest, unbuttoned his collar, loosened his tie, and took off his coat. He never loosened a scrap of his clothing until he undressed at bedtime, and to Jem and me this was the equivalent of him standing before us stark and naked. We exchanged horrified glances. Atticus put his hands in his pocket, and as he returned to the jury, I saw his gold collar button and the tips of his pen and pencil winking in the light. "Gentlemen," he said. Jem and I again looked at each other. Atticus might have said "Scout." His voice had lost its aridity, its detachment, and was talking to the jury as if they were folks on the post office corner. "Gentlemen," he was saying, "I shall be brief, but I would like to use my remaining time with you to remind you that this case is not a difficult one. It requires no minute sifting of complicated facts, but it does require you to be sure beyond all reasonable doubt as to the guilt of the defendant. To begin with, this case should never have come to trial. This case is as simple as black and white. The state has not produced one iota of medical evidence to effect that the crime Tom Robertson has charged with ever took place. It has relied instead upon the testimony of two witnesses whose evidence has not only been called into serious question on cross-examination, but has been flatly contradicted by the defendant. The defendant is not guilty, but somebody in this courtroom is. I have nothing but pity in my heart for the chief witness for the state, but my pity does not extend so far as to her putting a man's life at stake, which she has done in an effort to get rid of her own guilt. I say guilt, gentlemen, but it was guilt that motivated her. She has committed no crime. She has merely broken a rigid and time-honoured code of our society, a code so severe that whoever breaks it is hounded from our midst as unfit to live with. She is the victim of cruel poverty and ignorance, but I cannot pity her. She is white. She knew full well the enormity of her offence, but because her desires were stronger than the code she was breaking, she persisted in breaking it. She persisted, and her subsequent reaction is something that all of us have known at one time or another. She did something every child has done. She tried to put the evidence of her offence away from her. But in this case, she was no child hiding stolen contraband. She struck out at her victim. Of necessity, she must put him away from her. He must be removed from her presence, from this world. She must destroy the evidence of her offence. What was the evidence of her offence? Tom Robinson, a human being. She must put Tom Robinson away from her. Tom Robinson was her daily reminder of what she did. What did she do? She tempted her. She was white, and she tempted her. She did something that in our society is unspeakable. She kissed a black man. Not an old uncle, but a strong, young man. No code mattered to her before she broke it, but it came crashing down on her afterwards. Her father saw it, and the defendant has testified as to his remarks. What did her father do? We don't know, but there is circumstantial evidence to indicate that Mayella Ewell was beaten savagely by someone who led almost exclusively with his left. We do know in part what Mr. Ewell did. He did what any God-fearing, persevering, respectable white man would do under the circumstances. He swore out a warrant, no doubt signing it with his left hand, and Tom Robinson now sits before you, having taken the oath with the only good hand he possesses, his right hand. And so, a quiet, respectable, humble, who had the unmitigated temerity to feel sorry for a white woman, has had to put his word against two white people's. I need not remind you of their appearance and conduct on the stand. You saw them for yourselves. The witnesses for the state, with the exception of the Sheriff of Macomb County, have presented themselves to you gentlemen, to this court, in a cynical confidence that their testimony would not be doubted, confident that you gentlemen would go along with them, on the assumption, the evil assumption, that all lie, that all are basically immoral beings, that all men are not to be trusted around our women, an assumption one associates with minds of their calibre, which, gentlemen, we know is in itself a lie as black as Tom Robinson's skin, a lie I do not have to point out to you. You know the truth. And the truth is this: some lie, some are immoral, some men are not to be trusted around women, black and white. But this is a truth that applies to the human race and to no particular race of men. There is not a person in this courtroom who has never told a lie, who has never done an immoral thing, and there is no man living who has never looked upon a woman with desire. Atticus paused and took out his handkerchief. Then he took off his glasses and wiped them, and we saw another thirst. We had never seen him sweat. He was one of those men whose faces never perspired, but now it was shining tan. One more thing, gentlemen, before I quit. Thomas Jefferson once said that all men are created equal, a phrase that the Yankees and the distaff side of the executive branch in Washington are fond of hurling at us. There is a tendency in this year of grace, 1935, for certain people to use this phrase out of context, to satisfy all conditions. The most ridiculous example I can think of is that the people who run public education promote the stupid and idle along with the industrious. Because all men are created equal, educators will gravely tell you the children left behind suffer terrible feelings of inferiority. We know all men are not created equal in the sense some people would have us believe. Some people were smarter than others. Some people have more opportunities because they're born with it. Some men make more money than others. Some ladies make better cakes than others. Some people are born gifted beyond the normal scope of most men. But there is one way in this country in which all men are created equal. There is one human institution that makes a pauper the equal of a Rockefeller, the stupid man the equal of an Einstein, and the ignorant man the equal of any college president. That institution, gentlemen, is a court. It can be the Supreme Court of the United States, or the humblest JP court in the land, or this honourable court which you serve. Our courts have their faults, as does any human institution, but in this country our courts are the great levellers, and in our courts all men are created equal. I'm no idealist to believe firmly in the integrity of our courts and in the jury system. That is no ideal to me. It is a living, working reality. Gentlemen, a court is no better than each man of you sitting before me on this jury. A court is only as sound as its jury, and a jury is only as sound as the men who make it up. I am confident that you gentlemen will review without passion the evidence that you have heard. Come to a decision and restore this defendant to his family. In the name of God, do your duty. Atticus's voice had dropped, and as he turned away from the jury he said something I did not catch. He said it more to himself than to the court. I punched Jem. What did he say? In the name of God, believe him. I think that's what he said. Dill suddenly reached over me and tugged at Jem. Look yonder. We followed his finger with sinking hearts. Calpurnia was making her way up the middle aisle, walking straight towards Atticus. Okay, that is honestly amazing. I love that speech so much. I have goosebumps. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I didn't hype it up too much and you didn't enjoy it. Again, please email me and let me know what you think about it. Let me know what you think Atticus's messages are, and maybe how you think it's relevant still today. And I look forward to seeing anything that you want to share with me about that. But importantly, I want to reiterate that you need to go to Show My Homework and complete the quiz with this title. You should also always be aiming for 90%. Go ahead and do that now, and I will see you in a video a bit later this week.